Ethan Mitchell was the kind of man neighbors trusted, the kind of husband friends envied, and the kind of father-in-law parents welcomed into their family until a night he lured his wife Claire to a cliffside on her birthday. What appeared to be a romantic trip quickly spiraled into a nightmare, ending with a brutal act of betrayal that stunned an entire community. Beneath the surface of a picture-perfect marriage lay secrets of greed, manipulation, and a chilling plan for murder. This is a story of how one man's desire for wealth and control turned a celebration of life into a scene of horror, ChatGPT said. On a cool autumn morning, Ethan Mitchell carried himself with the calm demeanor of a man who appeared to have it all together. To his friends and colleagues, he was a devoted husband, a skilled architect, and a man who seemed to be building a good life with his wife, Claire Mitchell. But beneath the polished surface, Ethan was weighed down by financial strain, hidden debts, and a growing resentment he carefully disguised from the outside world. Claire, his wife of 7 years, was the opposite in many ways. She was a gentle elementary school teacher whose joy came from the small things in life: her students, her friendships, and her dream of starting a family. To everyone who knew her, Claire radiated kindness and hope, qualities that made her tragic end all the more haunting. The couple planned a special trip for Claire's birthday, a chance to reconnect and escape the stresses of their everyday lives. Friends recalled how Claire had excitedly spoken about hiking up a breathtaking cliffside trail, a place known for its panoramic views that stretched for miles. She imagined it as the perfect way to celebrate another year of life. Ethan, however, had a very different vision for how the trip would unfold. Behind his carefully rehearsed smiles, he had been making plans of his own plans, not for celebration, but for a sinister ending that would release him from the burdens he believed he carried. Detective Laura Hayes would later say that the case began like many others, with a tragic accident that didn't seem unusual at first, when she and her partner, Detective Marcus Reed, were first called to the scene. The report was simple. A woman had fallen from a cliff while celebrating her birthday with her husband. The initial story Ethan gave to the Rangers was that Claire slipped while trying to take in the view. But from the very beginning, Laura felt something in his story didn't sit right. It wasn't only the lack of visible grief, it was the way Ethan explained the fall, with a detached calmness that made the detectives pause. Rachel Thompson, Claire's best friend, would be one of the first to raise doubts about the tragedy. When she was told about the fall, Rachel said she immediately felt something was wrong. She knew how cautious Claire had always been, how she avoided risks and never went too close to dangerous ledges. She shared with investigators that Claire had confided in her about growing tensions in her marriage, the unspoken strain that was quietly eroding their once happy relationship. Rachel described how Claire often defended Ethan to others, dismissing his coldness as stress from work, but the truth was starting to weigh on her. As the pieces began to surface, prosecutor Julia Carter and Judge Alan Foster would later play crucial roles in ensuring the story of Claire's final moments was told in court. But in that first chapter of the investigation, it was only suspicion, whispers of doubt, and the unsettling feeling that a husband's story of a tragic accident didn't he match the reality of the woman who had lost her life on what should have been a joyful day. Ethan Mitchell's mask was beginning to crack, though at the time, only a few people could see it. Detective Laura Hayes couldn't shake the uneasy feeling gnawing at her as she reviewed the preliminary reports. On paper, the incident was labeled an accidental fall, the kind that happened too often in rugged hiking destinations. But there was something off about Ethan Mitchell's behavior. Something beyond the grief-stricken shock she expected from a husband who had just lost his wife in such a horrific way. He was composed, even rehearsed, as though he had told his story too many times in his own head before speaking it aloud. When she and Detective Marcus Reed sat down with him for a more formal interview, Ethan explained in detail how he and Claire had been hiking the cliff trail to celebrate her birthday. According to him, they stopped at a scenic overlook where Claire insisted on getting closer to the edge for a better view. He claimed he warned her to be careful, but before he could stop her, she slipped, lost her footing, and tumbled over the 1,000-foot drop. Ethan described running toward her, screaming her name, though no one else on the trail could confirm hearing him. What unsettled Laura most was the absence of emotion, and his delivery's voice was flat, almost mechanical. As the detectives began looking into Ethan's background, inconsistencies started to emerge. Financial records revealed he was drowning in debt. Credit card bills stacked up overdue mortgage payments, and even a second loan on their home that Claire's name wasn't listed on. Ethan, once admired for his architectural projects, had been struggling professionally, losing contracts and credibility. His outward success was a facade, one that Claire seemed largely unaware of. The life he portrayed to his wife and friends was collapsing, and the cracks were visible to anyone who dug beneath the surface. Detective Hayes also requested access to Claire's personal belongings. Among her things was a small journal, one she used more for short notes than long entries. In the weeks leading up to her death, Claire had scribbled thoughts that hinted at her growing unease. She wrote about Ethan being distant, secretive, and how he seemed preoccupied with money. In one haunting line, she noted, "Sometimes I feel like I don't really know him anymore." The words echoed in Laura's mind, fueling her determination to uncover the truth. Meanwhile, Rachel Thompson, Claire's best friend, continued to press the investigators. She met with them and described conversations in which Claire confided her doubts about Ethan's behavior. Rachel said Claire had been considering taking some time apart to clear her mind, but she never made it official. To Rachel, this wasn't an accident, was the tragic end of a marriage that had been unraveling for months. Detectives soon learned about the couple's life insurance policies. Ethan was the primary beneficiary of a sizable payout. That would erase his debts and leave him with enough money to start fresh. This discovery shifted the tone of the investigation entirely. What once looked like a tragic fall now carried the weight of potential motive. Detective Hayes couldn't ignore the feeling that Ethan's trip had been carefully planned, that the cliff was never meant to be a romantic backdrop for a birthday celebration, but rather a stage for something far darker. What had been disguised as an accident was beginning to look like a premeditated act. The case was far from closed, and Laura knew she was only beginning to peel back the layers of a carefully hidden truth. The morning after, Claire Mitchell's body was recovered. The autopsy began at the county medical examiner's office. Dr. Henry Collins, a seasoned forensic pathologist, approached the case with his usual precision, but almost immediately he noticed details that troubled him. While Claire had sustained catastrophic injuries from the fall, broken bones, internal bleeding, and massive trauma, consistent with the impact there were marks on her body that didn't match the narrative of an accidental slip. Around her wrists were faint bruises, circular in shape, as though someone had grabbed her tightly before the fall. These weren't injuries one would expect if she had simply lost her balance. Dr. Collins carefully photographed and documented the marks, noting that the pattern suggested a struggle. Even more unsettling, there were scratches along Claire's forearms, consistent with defensive wounds. It was as if, in her final moments, she had fought desperately to break free from someone's grasp. Detectives Laura Hayes and Marcus Reed were present when Dr. Collins shared his findings. The room grew heavy with silence as the implications settled in. If Claire had defensive wounds, then she hadn't merely slipped, she had been forced. Laura's instincts had been right, and now the evidence was beginning to back her up. The toxicology report added another twist. Small traces of sedatives were found in Claire's system levels, not high enough to render her unconscious, but enough to make her drowsy and unsteady. The timeline of when she might have ingested the drug was critical. Dr. Collins concluded it must have been within hours of her death, suggesting it was administered on the very day of the hike. Investigators turned their attention to Ethan's version of events. He claimed Claire had insisted on walking to the cliff's edge, but the forensic details suggested otherwise. Laura revisited his statement and noticed how carefully he had described Claire's clumsiness, as though planting the idea that she was prone to accidents. To Laura, it felt rehearsed, another layer of manipulation meant to shift suspicion away from himself. Detectives dug deeper into the couple's activities on the day of the hike. A receipt from a small cafe near the trailhead showed they had shared breakfast that morning. Witnesses remembered seeing them together, with Claire cheerful and talkative, while Ethan appeared tense and distracted. One waitress recalled something peculiar: Ethan ordering drinks for both of them, then sliding Claire's cup toward her without asking. It was a small detail, but one that now carried chilling significance in light of the sedatives found in her system. Meanwhile, investigators retrieved Claire's phone. Though damaged from the fall, data recovery specialists were able to extract her last photos and texts. Her final picture was of the cliffside, taken minutes before her death. But there was something eerie about it. Reflected faintly in her sunglasses was the blurred silhouette of Ethan, standing far too close behind her. When cross-referenced with Ethan's claim that he had been several steps back, the image painted a different story. Laura and Marcus now had a growing list of inconsistencies, But what troubled them most was Ethan's demeanor. While evidence mounted, he remained calm, attending interviews with an unsettling composure. To the detectives, it was as though he had convinced himself that his story was airtight, that no one would ever be able to prove otherwise. But the science was unraveling his lies, piece by piece. The autopsy findings shifted the case from a tragic accident into a probable homicide. For the first time, Ethan Mitchell was no longer viewed as a grieving husband, but as the prime suspect in his wife's death. As investigators tightened their focus on Ethan Mitchell, the case took a darker turn. What had begun as a tragic accident was now being pieced together as a carefully staged crime. And detectives Laura Hayes and Marcus Reed knew they needed to uncover what drove Ethan to such a calculated act. For most murders, the motive was money, jealousy, or freedom, and Ethan's life began to show traces of all three. The first red flag came from the couple's financial records. Claire had taken out a sizable life insurance policy just 2 years earlier, worth nearly $1 million. Ethan was listed as the sole beneficiary. Detectives found this particularly troubling because, despite his outward success, Ethan had been drowning in hidden debts. Credit card statements revealed tens of thousands owed, along with gambling transactions that painted a picture of desperation. Laura dug further into Ethan's work life. Though he projected the image of a successful financial advisor, in truth, his business had been floundering. Several clients had withdrawn funds after accusing him of mismanagement, and regulators were beginning to investigate. To Ethan, Claire's policy wasn't just a safety net, it was a lifeline. If Claire were gone, his financial troubles would vanish overnight. At the same time, the couple's marriage appeared far from the idyllic partnership Ethan had described. Neighbors told detectives that Claire had often confided in them about arguments, mostly centered around Ethan's reckless spending and his frequent late nights. Some said she had begun questioning whether she could trust him at all. One neighbor, an older woman named Ruth, recalled hearing Claire say she was tired of carrying the weight of Ethan's secrets. Then came a breakthrough. Investigators discovered that Ethan had reached out to an insurance agent only weeks before Claire's death, inquiring about how soon payouts could be collected in the event of an accidental death. The timing was damning, especially when paired with the toxicology report and the eyewitness account from the cafe. Ethan was no longer simply suspicious, he was looking more and more like a man who had orchestrated his wife's death for profit. But the most chilling evidence came from a hiker who finally came forward after seeing news reports about Claire's fall. He told police he had been on the same trail that day and had seen the couple near the edge of the cliff. What stuck in his memory was how uneasy Claire had seemed, almost as if she was resisting moving closer to the ledge. He remembered Ethan standing right beside her, one hand near her arm, his posture tense. Moments later, he heard a scream echo through the canyon. Detectives confronted Ethan again. This time, armed with the autopsy results, the toxicology findings, and the witness statement, Ethan's calm facade began to crack. His answers grew shorter, his voice sharper, and sweat collected on his brow. He maintained his innocence, but Laura noticed something she hadn't before, a nervous tick. A subtle tapping of his fingers against the table whenever the conversation steered toward money. The case against Ethan was becoming undeniable, yet Laura knew one piece was still missing. A clear link between the sedatives found in Claire's system and Ethan himself. If they could prove he had access to the drug and administered it, the evidence would be airtight. As detectives prepared search warrants for Ethan's home and office, the sense of urgency grew. They weren't just chasing proof of a motive. Anymore, they were chasing the fine details that would expose Ethan Mitchell as a cold and calculated killer, who thought he could disguise murder as misfortune. The search of Ethan Mitchell's home began early in the morning, before the sun had fully risen. Detectives Laura Hayes and Marcus Reed arrived with a team armed with a warrant and determined to uncover the missing link in the case. On the surface, Ethan's suburban home looked pristine, a carefully maintained facade of order and success. But Laura knew that behind polished appearances, there were often secrets waiting to be revealed. The living room was immaculate, almost too neat. Family photographs adorned the shelves, vacations, anniversaries, smiling faces. To the untrained eye, it looked like a picture-perfect household, but detectives weren't distracted by the surface. They methodically began their search, starting with the study where Ethan supposedly managed his financial advising work. Inside the desk drawers, they found stacks of unpaid bills, credit card statements, and documents showing loans taken out under Claire's name without her knowledge. More troubling, There were letters from creditors threatening legal action. Ethan's financial desperation was laid bare on paper, a motive that grew more convincing with each page turned. But the financial motive alone wasn't enough. They needed physical evidence to tie him to the sedatives discovered in Claire's bloodstream. The breakthrough came when Marcus pried open a locked cabinet tucked away in the corner of Ethan's study. Inside, neatly arranged in a small metal box, was a collection of prescription bottles. Some bore Ethan's name, but others were prescribed to patients he clearly had no relation to. Among them was a bottle containing the exact sedative found in Claire's toxicology report. The date on the prescription suggested it had been obtained only weeks before Claire's death. Laura's pulse quickened as she carefully bagged the bottle for evidence. This was the connection they had been waiting for, the drug that had weakened Claire before she fell. The discovery painted Ethan as not only opportunistic but deliberate. He hadn't left his wife's death to chance. He had planned it meticulously. As they continued the search, more troubling discoveries emerged. Hidden in Ethan's closet was a folder filled with insurance documents. Alongside Claire's $1 million life insurance policy, there were handwritten notes calculating potential payouts, debt reductions, and estimated timelines for collection. The chilling precision revealed a man who viewed his wife's life as little more than a financial equation to solve. In the garage, detectives uncovered yet another disturbing clue. A small notebook contained entries detailing trips, expenses, and cryptic notes about timing and location. On one page, the words "perfect place, no witnesses" were underlined twice. To Laura, it was clear. Ethan had scouted the cliffside location in advance, knowing it would provide the illusion of an accident. As the evidence piled up, detectives could no longer deny the truth. Ethan Mitchell had orchestrated his wife's death down to the smallest detail. He had sedated her, led her to the edge of a 1,000-foot cliff, and staged the perfect accident to escape his financial ruin. When confronted with the evidence during his next interrogation, Ethan's composure faltered. The man who once projected confidence and charm now looked cornered, his voice cracking as he attempted to explain away the discoveries. But the truth was undeniable. The locked cabinet of sedatives, the insurance notes, and the suspicious journal entries formed a web that tied him directly to the crime. For Laura, the most haunting part wasn't just the brutality of the act, it was the cold calculation behind it. Ethan hadn't killed in a moment of rage or impulse. He had plotted and prepared, reducing his wife of over a decade to a financial solution. The pieces of the puzzle were nearly complete, but Laura knew the case still needed one final nail in the coffin. A way to prove beyond all doubt that Ethan had administered the sedatives to Claire before her fatal fall. That crucial piece of evidence would make the difference between suspicion and a conviction that no jury could overlook. The forensic team worked tirelessly to analyze every shred of evidence pulled from Ethan Mitchell's home. While the financial records and insurance documents built a strong circumstantial case, detectives Laura Hayes and Marcus Reed knew they needed scientific proof that Ethan had directly administered the sedatives found in Claire's system. Without it, a skilled defense attorney could still argue that her death had been a tragic accident rather than a calculated murder. The first breakthrough came from the prescription bottles recovered in the locked cabinet. Forensic analysts examined the pill containers under ultraviolet light, uncovering Ethan's fingerprints on the caps and labels. That discovery alone tied him to the drugs, but the question remained: had he actually used them on Claire? Toxicologists dug deeper. Blood samples taken from Claire during her autopsy revealed not only the presence of the sedative, but also traces of crushed pill binders that were inconsistent with the medication Ethan was legally prescribed. This suggested that the drug had been mixed into food or drink rather than taken voluntarily. Detectives recalled Ethan's statement about Claire drinking wine the night of her death, and investigators decided to test the wine glasses retrieved from the Mitchell home. The results were damning. One of the glasses, identified through DNA swabs as Claire's, contained microscopic residue of the same sedative found in her bloodstream. The other glass, belonging to Ethan, showed no such traces. Forensic experts concluded that Ethan had spiked his wife's drink in the hours leading up to her fall. At the same time, digital forensics combed through Ethan's laptop. Hidden within his internet history were searches that read like a confession in themselves. How long before sedatives take effect? Best way to stage a fall, and life insurance payout after accidental death. Though Ethan had tried to delete the history, forensic software recovered the searches, creating a timeline of his planning that stretched back months before Claire's birthday trip. As the evidence mounted, Detectives returned to Ethan's notebook found in the garage. Lab technicians dusted the pages for indented writing impressions and revealed entries that had been scribbled over or erased. One chilling line emerged. Wine plus pill equals control. Laura Hayes felt her stomach tighten as she read the words. It was as if Ethan had documented the very method he later carried out. The team then turned their attention to Ethan's financial records once more. A forensic accountant traced unusual bank withdrawals leading up to Claire's death, including a large cash payment to a shadowy online pharmacy known for supplying unregulated prescription drugs. This connected the chain even further. Ethan had obtained the sedatives illegally, administered them to his wife, and orchestrated the perfect setting for her murder. By the time the forensic team presented their findings, the picture was complete. Ethan hadn't acted impulsively. He had carefully crafted a plan from the ground up. He purchased the drugs, tested their effects, recorded his calculations, and finally carried out the act on what should have been a day of celebration for his wife. When Laura and Marcus confronted Ethan with the forensic results, his arrogance began to crumble. The fingerprint evidence, the drug residue in Claire's wine glass, the incriminating searches, and the erased notes left him cornered. No amount of denial could erase the cold scientific proof that tied him to every stage of the crime. For Laura, it was the decisive turning point in the case. With the forensic evidence in hand, the suspicion of guilt became certainty. Ethan Mitchell had murdered his wife, not in a fit of passion, but with deliberate calculation, ensuring he would profit from her death. The case was no longer about proving possibility, it was about delivering justice.